What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another brand new episode of the Last Wave Podcast. We dive into topics like UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, conspiracies, nerd stuff, and pretty much everything else under the umbrella that you would consider the paranormal. We do a little bit of everything. We are in season 2 now. That's right. This should be episode 2 or 3, probably episode 2. So, welcome back. Thank you for listening. We are going to throw this under the uh, we were going to throw this under the umbrella of the hidden world, but we actually are going to expand on this a little bit and dive a little bit deeper into a very specific topic. So this will be an official season 2 episode. Today, we are going to go over what I call nature guardians. Now, a real quick mention before we get into today's episode. We are currently uploading Patreon exclusive episodes. So I'm going to try to do one every 2 weeks, but at least once a month. Patreon exclusive episodes. You get a whole new episode over there just for subscribers for Patreon. Again, it's set super cheap. It's set the same price as our blog. I think it's $1, $2, $3, something like that. $3 a month to help our show. It doesn't pay anyone's salary. It just gives us a little bit of extra boost for the hours of research that we put in, all the reading, the looking for research, looking for info, all that good stuff. Again, no one's going to be able to quit their job on $3 a month, but it helps boost our time a little bit. Allows us to put a little bit more time into the research and into the value and the things that we do for these episodes. So head on over to patreon.com, check us out there. You should find a little bit of the blog and some random video posts, and again, exclusive episodes to Patreon only. So again, today, for right now, we're going to go into what I call nature guardians. Throughout time, it seems that there have been stories of strange beings or creatures protecting sacred lands or areas of forests, basically that have been hidden away from the world. If my research, the conglomeration of what I do is mainly focused, my main focus is hauntings, but also cryptids and fae folklore of that type of work. So if my research is correct, it's possible that these beings are all connected to some greater force. Again, under the umbrella of the hidden world-esque type kind of feel. Whether we acknowledge them or not, these stories, once found, are seemingly common and have gone back hundreds, if not thousands of years. So why are these beings protecting these places? Is it simply because they're part of nature? Or is there a purpose? Is there a reason? Are they made to guard these realms? Let's just dive into some of these stories. I know, first one, if you're a fan of the show and you have listened to the Hidden World episodes, I have mentioned the Gremlins of World War II. Now I'm going to tie them into this because it really seemed to me that the RAF pilots that were seeing these small beings, they're basically seeing fairies and gremlin-like type kind of beings in their airplanes. They were disrupting mechanics. They had small clothing, like they even had clothes on. And Roald Dahl, the author of Gremlins, that became the movie, was actually one of these people that spotted these gremlins. And his plane actually crashed. So it's ironic. I mean, they don't look anything like they do in the movies, allegedly. They look similar as far as the ears and the stature. But I think what we're really looking at more with this seems to be more of a gnome slash fairy type creature. Just by the clothing, the size, the mischief. I think we're looking at more of a fairy type kind of creature. But anyway, it seems because of them trying to stop the pilots and to stop the bombings and stuff like that, were they possibly trying to protect their native lands or their people's native lands? And that immediately led me to looking into fairy forts and trees and stories of people sleeping or messing with fairy forts, fairy circles, and being attacked by groups of fairies, being taken away by the fae, whisked away for 3 days or for eternity. It seems to be 3 days or you're gone forever. That's how it seems to be for some reason. And then when you come back, you don't remember anything that's happened. you could have imagined you were gone for 100 years and you've only been gone 3 days. So I think that's kind of cool. And again, all of this stuff seems to be nature, nature guided. I would say they are trying to protect their lands. They're one of my favorite stories I've actually used on my own young family members here because we have a holly tree on the property. And a holly tree is a magic tree. It's a fairy type kind of tree. You're supposed to be able to make, magic wands out of holly. That's why we have the term Hollywood, as far as that's where the magic of the cinema is the magic of Hollywood. It all ties in with the occult magic symbols and words. So I just think that's interesting. But anyway, my younger members of the family were climbing on the tree. I relate to them one of my favorite stories that I've probably ever found, and it's the story of a farmer who cut down a fairy tree on his land, and he woke up in the morning with his head on backwards. And I absolutely love that story because, I mean, I guess technically someone gets hurt, but it's more of a light-hearted legend, I think. Maybe it's true. I just heard it as a myth kind of story. That would be awful if that really happened. Um, we also have a story that I've heard of from a couple different places, from a couple different angles, whether it be a history style approach, a cryptid style approach, what have you. But our next story is of Ape Canyon in summer 1924. A group of miners in Ape Canyon, and this is out towards Mount St. Helens. The miners spent the day searching for spots to mine, like caves and such. And that night, however, upon returning to their cabin, they were attacked by a group of so-called ape men. Now, there was some rumor as to the beginning of this encounter or the reason for it. Some say the miners had actually seen one of the creatures earlier that day and shot at it, and we're basically talking about Bigfoot here. But that night, this group of ape men had tracked them back to their canoe, or back to their cabin, sorry, and they were throwing rocks at the building. One even broke a big enough hole through the wall that they were able to reach inside, allegedly grabbing an axe and trying to pull it out of the cabin. The miners beat the hand away, and the creature retreated. They claimed that shooting at the creatures did nothing. They simply retreated for a time, only to return a few moments later. The battle allegedly lasted through the night, and in the morning the miners slowly left the cabin, apparently seeing one of the creatures watching from a nearby overhang. One of the men shot the creature and watched it fall. The men booked it out of there, and the story ran in the paper, and one miner eventually wrote a book about it. Now, I don't know how you go through this all night, and you've been shooting at them, it does nothing, you finally get away, and you see one, and you go to shoot it. I don't know how it works. I don't know how the mind can can do that, but hey, some of us don't make the best choices. And again, that story, while it's a little, you know, different to connect to this, if you look at what the men were attempting to do, this was during the time of bring dynamite and bring pickaxes and look at all these serene spots that they're going to destroy in order to try to find gold and other minerals and ore and things like that. So it's thought and it's possible that these creatures were protecting their land. These miners were over there encroaching on it, attempting to take the resources, harm the land. So these ape men, these Bigfoot, Sasquatch-like creatures, basically attempted to scare them off. So moving on, those are two pretty cool stories that connect to this whole nature guardian feel. The next story is very interesting. It's I've lost kind of some of the details over the years. I heard this probably a couple of years ago, and we'll go into that a little bit. But our next story takes place on a small farm in Mississippi in the 1940s. And again, this was relayed through one of the grandkids of the family who encountered these beings. But the story was told by a really great storyteller. You can find him on YouTube and online. His name's Dark Waters. He looks for stories like we do, but he retells them basically just as a story, as a report, There's nice music and there's good setting, it's ominous tones, and he's basically relaying. He's not relaying stories; he's relaying true accounts that people bring to him, and he researches them. He even goes out to meet the people, sees the scenes. Pretty fantastic work. But this is one of his well-known stories. His actual story is like 3 hours and some change long, or something like that. So it's a really long episode. Um, but anyway, uh, take just a quick break to grab something to drink, and we'll be right back. All right, and we're back. Sorry about that. Obviously, all this talking. I just finished another episode, so even though we're only 11 minutes into this one, I've been going for about 45 minutes straight. So anyway, moving on. Next story takes place a small farm, like I said, in Mississippi in the 1940s. The family had struck a deal with a local lumber company, and they began taking down trees. Again, here we see this harming of nature at they took down the trees at the edge of their property. Some of which, and we see this a lot, again with the story previously, there is certain rumors about that story as well that this was also Native American land. So this family taking down trees, this was old Native American land that they were encroaching on just outside of their property. The logging was successful, and eventually a larger operation was started, even creating a logging road straight back into the deep forest surrounding their property. One of the family members went out to hunt at the edge of the operation and came back with a disturbing report. Apparently, he had found multiple severed deer heads, one of which was on a stake in the ground. The loggers began reporting fast moving creatures stalking the outside of the camp. Now, I don't know about you, but that straight up sounds terrifying. It's not like they say creatures, they don't say humans running around. They straight up say creatures were running around after you find severed freaking deer heads, one of which being on a stake. That, to me, severed deer heads, okay. Severed deer head on a stake, that's intention. That is, that's something. That's a human motivation. You know what I'm saying? That's an attempt to scare. So I just thought that was interesting to note. One day, the loggers loaded into a truck and came to the farm very quickly. They reported that one of their team had actually gone missing, and all they could find was his bloody shirt. The men actually quit there that day, and the men of the family and farm hands went out looking for this missing logger, only to return that night speaking in hushed and whispers amongst themselves. That night before dawn, just before dawn, the dogs on the farm started going crazy, howling, barking, just wailing, just going crazy outside. The men of the family brought the dogs in and stayed awake through the night with weapons basically drawn. The teller of the story, a young man at this time, was hurried upstairs to hide with his grandmother, who relented and told him that the men had shot a large animal in the forest that day, and that they think the rest of the pack had followed them back to the house. There were loud howls from outside, and this is once the dogs had been brought inside. There was scratching against the walls, and something hitting the side of the house so hard it sounded as though the walls would cave in, was the report. The next morning, after the sounds had stopped, the family went out to find a dead pig or dead hog, and it had been smashed into the wall of the farmhouse, basically until it was little more than a mangled pile of meat. Again, that sounds terrifying. That's not a that's not a human thing to do. So it's like, what are you dealing with? That there's so much to this story, and I'm not doing it nowhere near the possibility of justice because we'd be on here forever. But these are just some of like the just a few of the crazy points that I'm pulling from the story. And I'm going to skip ahead here. There's a lot more, but the attacks followed on for years, including descriptions that were clear-cut wolfmen, just straight up, not werewolves, wolfmen, the big, um, you know, growly, scary wolf dude. They're huge, they're muscular. Imagine Underworld. This is not your movie werewolf. These are big hunting creatures. The family even noticed that there was an alpha and other members of the pack that had different colors to their fur. So they were huge or muscular, wolf-like beasts that just ravaged their farm animals, and even taking out hunters and loggers throughout the years. Allegedly losing multiple men to the beasts in the woods so much that the owner of the house was thought to be just straight up murdering them, as he hired them. The family lost their business, their homes, and eventually had no option but to leave their land. Again, there's a ton more info to this case and worth hearing in its entirety. It's the Siege of Lockett Ranch. The Siege of Lockett Ranch. So if you get a chance to look it up, it will absolutely blow your mind. The exact site of the farm has not been told in the story, but it was in Taylor, Mississippi, I believe is the name of the town. And it's possible the pack of those beasts are still there to this day. Maybe they, come and go. Maybe there's a hunting cycle. I don't know, but it is definitely one of the craziest and scary stories that you'll hear as far as Wolfman and Dogman. Now, and it's also important to note because I listened to this Dark Waters guy again, huge fan. He has a lot of Dogmen slash werewolf stories, and it seems that there's usually a theme. There's usually a theme that if you don't harm them or harm their land, harm the nature, that you're okay. Um, if you shoot at them, as we heard with the Bigfoot story, as well, if you shoot at them or attempt to harm them in any way, then obviously they'll ruin your life. There's multiple reports from multiple people about the type of situation that happened on the farmland. I've heard reports of people basically harming the land or doing something to irritate these creatures. So what they would do is basically they come in and they would destroy your house. If they couldn't get in the house, they would scratch the house, climb on the roof. I've heard multiple stories of wolfmen on the roof. Again, my God, that'd be so scary. Like an 8, 9 foot tall wolfman sitting on your roof. You're just out for like a smoke or, out barbecuing with the family. And you look up and all of a sudden, boom, it's Underworld on the roof. It's scary as hell. No thanks. Me and werewolves have a very special relationship. That's one of my favorite things to research. I have a huge tattoo of a werewolf. But no thank you. That sounds terrifying. Moving on to a slightly, well, a far more, well, I can't really say more interesting because it just depends on what you're into. But a very interesting story. I think I heard this on a podcast or something months ago, maybe a year ago. But the last story today is actually the oldest. It's from around 800 AD. A small crew of Norse Vikings were heading for a fabled Emerald Isle full of treasure. This Emerald Isle was Ireland, and as the ships drew near, a huge storm whipped up just as they were seeing the shore. The ships and the Viking crew were tossed about, and three of the men awoke on the beach. So basically, they lost some ships made it, but these three guys woke up alone on the beach. Once they had gathered up whatever they could find put it in their pockets, whatever weapons they could find, they began to venture inland and were eventually greeted by, they report, a small humanoid. The little guy was reportedly dressed in a felt-like green jacket and pants, brown accents, and even a little hat. And this is just a story that's one of those passed down story legends type kind of thing. So I'm not like reading this from someone's diary. Obviously, this is a long time ago. Anyway, continuing. Basically, as we know it now, leprechaun is basically what they described, urged the Viking sailors to follow him. He led them into a cave or subterranean area at least. The cave was lit with torches, and the men even reported furniture and a larger room with a table where a small feast was apparently taking place. The feast was with other fairy-type creatures as well. Like I said, fairies, leprechauns, gnome-esque creatures. I can imagine back then it was more likely that it would be more okay with humankind than they are these days. Obviously, they know what we're capable of now, but back then, with the world being so spread out, these creatures had much more, space to roam, much more openness, I guess you would say. Today, I doubt we'd really get invited to a feast, any of us. So it's kind of this is a very rare story. It's very interesting. As the men were invited to join the feast and to rest, they noticed something in a side room, a glowing dome of light. It seemed to be transparent, but was there. It was very physical. The description actually sounds like a modern force field, if you could think about it. But anyway, behind this field or dome was treasure, stereotypical pots of gold, jewels, etc. And the Vikings noted that they could see these beings walking through the field, so they knew it was permeable. It appeared to be a dome, but it was permeable. You could move through it. This again, it sounds like an actual force field. And now this is where the story gets weird, and it was already weird, but apparently the feast was then attacked by some unknown upright creature with multiple arms and multiple eyes. I would assume if we are in the Fey realm of some type of ogre or goblin, perhaps. It really sounds like something along those lines. But anyway, one of the Vikings fakes an injury, and as the other two bolt out of the area, and chaos ensues because this crazy creature is attacking the feast, the injured, air quotes, Viking goes for the Dome of Light. He enters it, manages to snag a full pot of gold. Apparently, he leaves one solid gold coin behind as a joke. He then escapes the cave and rejoins his cohort outside. The men quickly make their way to the shore, and luckily, they find one of the ships that has washed up and is intact. So they sail away from the Emerald Isle, treasure in tow. A little ways into the trip, however, they begin to hear laughter from the ship's hold. And upon lifting the sheet, they see a leprechaun standing there in the hold of the ship, holding the pot of gold. He laughs again and vanishes, leaving behind one solid gold coin. And laughter could be heard in the air as the ship sailed on towards home. Now, I love that story. I love all these stories. But it seems like all these stories have one thing in common. The humans were intent on bad or had already inflicted damage on a certain area, somewhere in nature. You have the World War II pilots aiming bombs over cities and countrysides, the ape men protecting gold sites and possible native land, the dogmen or wolfman pack attacking a home only once their land had been disturbed, and freaking leprechauns managed to thwart a Viking invasion and just leave them with one gold to go the way home. Pretty interesting stories, and even more so when tied together. Again, it's not an easy string to tie together, but again, we see multiple reports of what appear to be these beings guarding nature. And I just find that to be incredibly interesting. Is it that they are nature guardians? Are they part of the whole spirit that is, I guess we're going to say Mother Earth or Gaia? Are they in their own world, like our Hidden World series? Does that just encompass everything from fairies, gnomes, trolls, goblins, ogres, Bigfoot, wolfmen? Are they all in this paranormal umbrella of the hidden world? I don't know. That seems to me where the research goes. It always seems to be able to tie something to something. And again, if you followed our channel throughout this whole season one, I think we're at 70 episodes now, which is just crazy to me. I'm so glad that we're doing this. But it seems like you can tie strings together, and the paranormal web theory is kind of my main thing. So, tying UFO abductions to fairy abductions and folklore to biblical, stuff, and Bigfoot, you could tie it to Fey folklore, like we just did. One of my favorite things is tying poltergeist activity to Fey folklore. And again, that could be construed as when the Fae are angry, they come in your house, they mess up stuff, they take stuff, they rearrange stuff, curl up your headphones, all that good stuff. So in closing, I think it's rather interesting that we have multiple reports of beings protecting nature. You have far fewer reports of creatures just attacking people or attacking animals. You have your offshoots, your chupacabra, your yeti, which seems to be a little bit more aggressive than the normal Sasquatch, and you also have, oh my gosh, the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil seems to be a rather aggressive cryptid. So you do have those. You have your more aggressive ones, but for the most part, anything you could kind of tie to the Fae is either peaceful, inquisitive, or just want you to be respectful of the nature and respectful of their land. So whether that's true or not, I have no earthly idea. But that seems to be where the stories, the legends, the history, the research leads. So maybe it is. For now, we're definitely going to continue with the Hidden World series. I've got another episode coming up just for that. So actually, I've got at least one episode, maybe two episodes ready to go, ready to crank out for that series that are going to be pretty cool, pretty incredible. We definitely just posted for the ad series, was one of our more recent videos, and we got some crazy responses for the ad. So check that out as well. As always, thanks for listening. As a reminder, we are now doing Patreon exclusive episodes. So head over there, check that out. We definitely dove into some UFO topics this week. Head over there, check that out. As always, thank you for listening. We made it to season 2. Hopefully we can do this a lot longer. We'll get Buster back in here for a couple more episodes. Obviously, it's hard getting anyone together in this time of pandemic, epidemic, whatever you want to call it. But again, as always, thanks for listening. Subscribe if you haven't already. Throw a like on the recordings, the videos, and we'll catch everybody on the next episode.